To the Indians Who Died in Africa, is a solemn commemorative poem written by T.S. Eliot in 1943, as an epitaph for War Memorial in Nairobi, Kenya. Though brief in length, the poem carries immense historical, cultural, and philosophical weight. Commissioned to honor Indian soldiers who served and died fighting for the British Empire during World War II, the poem is unique in Eliot's body of work for its direct engagement with imperial history and post-colonial questions of identity, sacrifice, and remembrance. Eliot's poem consists of only 5 lines, but each is rich in implication. The speaker addresses Indian soldiers who fought and died during World War II in African campaigns. The poem acknowledges that these men died believing in the British Empire, demonstrating loyalty that transcended racial and colonial divisions. Their deaths, Eliot implies, were both acts of duty and tragic symbols of imperial politics. The poem offers no romanticism of war. Instead, it is quietly elegiac, marked by a restrained grief. The Indian soldiers, anonymous and far from their homeland, are remembered not for grand victories, but for the moral complexity of their sacrifice. Their loyalty lay between the enmity of race and race, suggesting that their lives were caught in the contradictions of a racially stratified imperial order. Analysis of themes. 1. Loyalty and irony. One of the central themes is loyalty. Eliot honors the Indian soldiers' faithfulness to the British Empire. However, there is a quiet irony embedded in this praise. The loyalty was to a regime that colonized their homeland. This paradox, of colonized subjects dying for their colonizers, is presented with poetic subtlety. Eliot doesn't condemn it outright but allows the irony to speak for itself. 2. War and anonymous sacrifice. The poem does not name any soldiers. Their anonymity emphasizes the scale of loss and the universality of death in war. These men died not as individuals but as representatives of a colonized people called to serve an empire. Eliot's sparse language underscores the tragedy of such anonymous sacrifice. 3. Colonialism and race. Eliot writes, "Between the enmity of race and race." This line acknowledges the racial dynamics that underpinned colonial warfare. Indian soldiers were sent to fight in Africa, a land foreign to them, often in service of colonial agendas that treated both Africans and Indians as subordinates. The poem delicately exposes how empire pitted races against each other, even as it relied on their cooperation. 4. Memory and commemoration. By writing this epitaph, Eliot participates in the act of memorialization. He carves out a space, however brief, for the memory of Indian soldiers in imperial history. The poem recognizes their contribution at a time when colonial narratives often overlooked or erased such stories. The act of remembrance itself is political. Literary and stylistic features. 1. Brevity and compression. The poem's power lies in its brevity. With only 5 lines, Eliot uses compression as a tool to distill history, emotion, and critique. The controlled language is appropriate for an epitaph, where every word bears weight and finality. 2. Tone and diction. The tone is solemn and respectful. Eliot avoids grandiose language, using simple yet profound words. Died, believing, loyalty, enmity. This minimalism lends the poem a timeless, almost sacred quality, fitting for a war memorial. 3. Irony and ambiguity. Eliot, though not explicitly political, weaves ambiguity into the lines. While on the surface, the poem reads as a tribute, it also raises questions about the ethics of empire, the exploitation of colonial subjects, and the morality of dying for another's cause. The line, "For the white man's rule," is particularly loaded, both an acknowledgement and a critique. 4. Biblical echoes and moral undertones. As in many of Eliot's works, there are faint biblical echoes in the tone of the poem, especially in the moral gravity of words like belief and loyalty. The poem reads like a lament, drawing on traditions of sacred mourning without overt religious references. Historical and political context. 1. Indian troops in World War II. Over 2.5 million Indian soldiers fought for the British during World War II, many in African campaigns such as Ethiopia, Eritrea, and North Africa. These men were essential to the British war effort, yet were often treated as expendable, underpaid, and rarely honored in Western accounts. Eliot's poem serves to fill a historical silence, acknowledging their contribution at a time when few others did. However, it also reflects the contradictions of loyalty under colonial rule. 2. Imperial Remembrance. Commissioned as part of a British memorial, the poem reflects the tensions of empire at war. The British Empire sought to memorialize colonial soldiers even as it denied them equality. Eliot's poem, though serving the purpose of imperial memory, subtly interrogates it through tone and implication. 3. Post-colonial readings. From a post-colonial perspective, the poem can be read as both homage and critique. While it validates Indian sacrifice, it also questions the system that made such sacrifice necessary. Eliot, a complex figure in terms of political views, offers no easy answers, leaving the ethical contradictions unresolved. Reception and legacy. Though not one of Eliot's most famous works, To the Indians Who Died in Africa has gained attention in post-colonial literary studies. It is often analyzed for how it captures the muted, uncomfortable space of colonial remembrance. It has been praised for its emotional restraint, historical consciousness, and subtle moral questioning. In India and among the Indian diaspora, the poem is sometimes viewed with ambivalence, appreciated for acknowledging Indian sacrifice, but also scrutinized for its implicit validation of imperial narratives. Conclusion. To the Indians Who Died in Africa is a masterful epitaph in miniature. With minimal language, Eliot honors the Indian soldiers who died in a war that was not fully their own. He captures the tragedy of loyalty in a colonial world, the anonymity of death, and the burden of history. The poem is not a celebration of war or empire but a quiet, dignified recognition of human cost.